On today's program, journalist Oliver Milman, the environment correspondent at The Guardian. He's out with a book whose topic many might find surprising: insects and their demise. The book, called The Insect Crisis: The Fall of the Tiny Empires That Run the World, is a wake-up call for the fast-growing disappearance of the insect. Insects make up 3/4 of all species of animals on the planet, and they have survived an immense amount of change to our globe in their 400 plus million year history. But in some parts of the globe, insect populations have gone down by half, 3/4, and quoting from the book, in the seemingly benign countryside of Denmark, as cataclysmic as 97%. What's causing all this? Well, in speaking about insect populations in the Amazon, the Brazilian scientist Felipe Franca says, quote, "If climate change continues, we will not only see less biodiverse forests, but also make them less able to recover after further disturbances." So what is causing the collapse of the insect world? Why does this alarming decline pose such a threat to us? And what can be done to stem the loss of the miniature empires that hold aloft life as we know it? Well, Oliver Milman joins me now. Welcome.
Hi, great to be with you.
Why insects? Why this topic? You write about the environment. You've made a career writing about the environment, climate change, forest fires, whatever, all over the world. What drew you to insects?
Yeah, I think if somebody told me kind of 3-4 years ago that my first book would be on insects, I don't think I would have quite believed them. I mean, like you say, I've written about the environment for a while now for The Guardian, and it's kind of taken me diving on the Great Barrier Reef and driving, electric vehicles and going to the Arctic and, on the hunt for grizzly bears out in Montana and that kind of thing. So, I've been kind of drawn to the kind of big flashy things of our world, the big kind of conservation icons that we all kind of revere and value, the bears and the orangutans and the rhinos of this world. And obviously climate change is such a huge, all-encompassing topic. There's so much to that, and not many people would associate insects with that in any way at all. So I think it would be a surprise to me as much as anyone that this would be my first book, but it did kind of strike me around kind of 2017, 2018, 2019. We started to get these kind of series of studies coming out from scientists showing these quite startling declines in insect numbers. You mentioned some of the numbers there. I mean, we're talking about huge drops, kind of 80-90% or more in certain parts of the world. And
since when? In the past, what, year, 20 years, 100 years?
Just the last few decades. So the study from Denmark, for example, that you mentioned, this rather eccentric scientist took this study by driving an old beat up 1960s Ford Anglia up and down the same stretch of road in Denmark every summer, and he's been doing that every summer since 1997. To measure the number of bugs that actually hit his windshield. So he stops the car at the end of the road and then measures how many bugs are there. He traps them also in the countryside around there. So it's not just the windshield, but he's kind of measuring what's called the windshield effect, which many of us can kind of understand who aren't kind of entomologists. That, when you're a kid, if you're of a certain age, you remember driving across country, maybe on vacation somewhere, and your parents would have to stop the car to clean the bugs off the windshield, or at least you get to your destination and there'd be kind of bugs all over the place. And it's just a less common thing than it once was. And he measured that, and he found there was a 97% decline in insect numbers since 1997. So we're just talking about a few decades. In Germany, there was a study came out in 2017. They found that 3/4 of flying insects in nature reserves, not in cities or industrial areas or agriculture, in nature reserves in Germany, 3/4 down since 1989. So since the fall of the Berlin Wall, Germany's lost 3/4 of its flying insects, which is quite astonishing if you think about it. I mean, we may have wiped out 95% of the world's tigers, for example, but we've done it over a century, maybe 150 years. We seem to be losing insects in some part of the world in similar proportions, but in far shorter time span. I mean, these are quite alarming drops, and it kind of struck me from speaking to the scientists, this was maybe the most significant and yet the quietest conservation disaster happening in the world at the moment, with consequences on a par with perhaps climate change itself, if things get really bad. So I thought it was important to kind of highlight this and make more people aware of it through the book.
Well, you spoke to a lot of scientists for this book, and I'm curious all over the world to hear what they found surprising or not surprising about this. Are these scientists surprised at the rates? Or did they expect it? Did they predict it? Were they ringing the alarm bells 20 years ago and no one listened? Or are they, the people who are really in it day to day, genuinely shocked?
Yeah, I mean, some of them were kind of talking about it anecdotally amongst themselves that numbers were down, but yeah, a lot of the scientists were shocked when they actually looked through the data. I mean, up until recently, it seemed pointless to count insects. I mean, why would you? I mean, they're kind of everywhere. It seems like they're everywhere, annoyingly so for a lot of us when we get kind of stung or bitten by them. I don't think many people would think, certainly until recently, that a shortage of insects was either happening or an issue if it did happen. So there wasn't really much research being done kind of long term over population numbers, because why would you bother? Why would you try and get the funding to do such a thing? It'd be much more interesting to find cool new species of bumblebees or beetles or butterflies and name them after yourself than it would be to actually count them. But there were some people taking numbers. There were some kind of longer term studies, and when they did crunch the data, they found, these quite amazing declines, really. And I think it surprised a lot of scientists. It's kind of kicked off this whole kind of media line about insectageddon, insect apocalypse, and so on. So the public have become more aware of it, but certainly wasn't really on science's radar, I would say, kind of a decade ago at least. It wasn't really something that was being talked about. Now it's being talked about far more.
Well, we'll go to the insectageddon or insect apocalypse or whatever you want to call it. We can do that a little bit later. Let's just focus on, for example, mosquitoes, which is obviously something that none of us like to encounter, whether it's, landing on the arm or one, ruining a good night's sleep, which all it takes is one mosquito that you can't find in the middle of the night, buzzing in your ear, and then you're awake for the next 6 hours. So you write here that in the chapter Zero Insect Days, there is a case for the defense of mosquitoes. Okay, I'm reluctant to hear it, but let's hear it. There are around 3,500 species of mosquito, but only around 10 are responsible in any significant way for human disease. Erica McAllister, the fly expert at the Natural History Museum, points out that mosquitoes themselves have never technically killed anyone. She has calculated, this is something, it would take 440,000 of them to somehow bite and drain you of blood at the same time for you to die, but that diseases have taken advantage of mosquitoes' need for a blood meal and used them as a vector. McAllister, the scientist from the Natural History Museum, says here, malaria and other mosquito-transmitted diseases are very bad, but we shouldn't get rid of all species of mosquitoes. The vast majority perform an array of ecological functions, but receive even less credit for this than other flies and cockroaches. Supporting the termination of all mosquitoes is like saying, let's get rid of all the primates, all the orangutans, all the gorillas, because I know one species of primate that's quite bad. So mosquitoes, as I've learned here, I'm sure many people would also learn, they are very, as you say, adroit at pollinating certain plants, orchids. For example, they desire this floral nectar, and it's not witnessed because they do this after dusk or at dark. So it's very different than the bumblebee, which we read about all the time. We've been reading about for years and years about the demise of the bumblebee. We see them flying around in the gardens. Well, tell us about the functions of mosquitoes other than driving us nuts.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably 5 people in the world who are passionate defenders of mosquitoes, and I think I spoke to all of them for the book. Because I think there are not many of us who value them, see the point in them being around. I think if most
so you're not one of the 5 yet. This didn't convince you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to at least put their point of view. I mean, I wouldn't say I'll come out to this as a passionate lover of mosquitoes. I mean, if one's going to bite me, I'm still going to squash it. But I think most of us, if we could press a button and get rid of all of them, we would. The thing is that if we did do that, we would set in motion an array of consequences we probably don't quite grasp. I mean, like you say, they pollinate certain flowers, orchids and tansies. They do that at dusk, so we don't really see it happen. We don't really think about them doing that. Bees obviously get all the credit for doing pollination work, and they do most of it, of course. They also are food for other creatures, amphibians, birds, and so on. So there's a whole layer of the food chain they would be removing. And of course, none of that is to kind of downplay the impact of malaria and dengue and other diseases they spread. I mean, they're horrendous, and they, you know, in many respects, the worst, animal there is on Earth in terms of deaths of humans. I mean, malaria and dengue kill far more people than, sharks and spiders and snakes and so on. But I think it's important to realize that we live in a kind of connected world, that humans don't float above nature. We are part of it. You yank away certain insects, including mosquitoes, and certain animals have less to eat. Then that cascades up the food chain, and we don't know what the consequences would be. In mosquitoes also recycle nutrients through plants and soils like other insects. So the kind of health of ecosystems is dependent in part on mosquitoes, obviously not entirely. They're just part of the fabric. I think it's important though to kind of think about what's valuable and what isn't in a kind of slightly different light. I did speak to one scientist who spent 20 years trying to find ways to kill all mosquitoes through genetic modification. She said she had an epiphany one day where she looked through a microscope and saw how beautiful they are with their kind of big compound eyes and their colorful wings. And she thought, well, maybe there's a different way we can do this. Maybe breed them so that they don't reproduce as much or don't carry disease, rather than just killing them all. Because like she said, and I was saying there, getting rid of all of them would actually deprive a lot of animals and ecosystems of a service, of a function, certainly one that we don't really appreciate that often. It's hard to kind of champion mosquitoes, but there are people out there doing it.
What other animals, I'm curious, what other insects struck you as maybe something you thought something of, and then you talked to scientists, did research, wrote about it, and completely changed your opinion? I mean, there's so many to pick from. There's so many insects in the world, as you point out, as you tell us. What surprised you about sort of another species, maybe not mosquitoes, something else that was of interest? I mean, I was shocked to learn that there's 7,500 species of flies in the world. You write a lot about flies as well. I mean, 7,500 species of fly is kind of sort of mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's just the assassin fly. I mean, it's far more than that. This is just a creature that spears other insects and sucks out their organs. And there's more species of this one type of fly than there is all mammals in the world. When you think about it, it's quite astonishing, isn't it? All the dogs and cats and whales and primates. I mean, insects are incredible in their diversity. They, you can learn new things about them every day, which I did for the book. It was kind of fascinating learning about this kind of water beetle that escapes being eaten by a frog by climbing through its stomach and out of his bottom. It can do this kind of James Bond style escape out of there. Learning about monarch butterflies and their incredible migration from thousands of miles from the US and Canada down to Mexico. I mean, they're the weight of a raisin, and yet they can do thousands of miles in this kind of relay down to Mexico and back again, using incredible navigational skills, which is kind of amazing. Dragonflies are amazing in terms of their ability to fly, and they can hover in winds that would down a helicopter. I mean, they've got incredible physical abilities. I mean, and bees, I mean, there's so much to talk about with bees. I mean, honeybees, I mean, you think about insects in general as being these kind of mindless, small, buzzy things that kind of fly around and are kind of pre-programmed and a bit brainless, but they're not very, they're not very intelligent. But bees are incredible with their logistical abilities. They can count. They can understand the concept of zero. It's been found that honeybees can detect landmines better than sniffer dogs. Bumblebees will, give up sleep to care for their for the young of the hive. There's kind of form of consciousness there.
How do we know this all about? I want to hear more, but I also want to hear how we know exactly. How do we know they understand what zero means? It's something that comes up in the book, and I said, well, I believe you, but
Yeah,
why?
there was a kind of studies done by scientists where they kind of use food rewards to show, if bees can go to the reward if they see certain numbers of things, and that if they don't get a reward if nothing's there, they can kind of understand nothing and something, and they can understand the addition of things, so they can get rewards for those things. So they will take a path towards those things. They can learn that. It is incredible that the things that they can be taught to do and can pick up quickly. I mean, bumblebees can play soccer. They could be taught to kick around a little ball, again for a kind of a food reward. It's incredible to kind of see all the things that scientists have been able to find that bees can do. Again, for such small creatures, they have quite incredible abilities.
What is it about insects that we need to be thinking about? There's a lot of things in the world going on and a lot of issues for us to care about. Are there remedies that that the ordinary person can take? But also, how much of this do you think is climate change and the change of the atmosphere, change of the conditions on Earth regarding human activity, and how much is a mystery? It seems like a lot of scientists obviously say, well, yes, climate change is a part of it, but there is a mysterious, bizarre aspect here, right? It's not all about climate change.
No, and it's hard to pinpoint the exact cause of declines in some places. I mean, it's not like you have a coroner with a dead bee and some sort of official explanation of why they died, and can collate that data. But there's three big areas that scientists point to. Climate change is one. Insects can't move very far. Generally, they're trapped within a certain band of temperature that they are adapted to. You start, cranking that temperature up, they cannot survive beyond a certain tolerance point. We're also scrambling the seasons. So spring is arriving about 20 days earlier than it once did 100 years ago in certain parts of the US. So that's thrown off kilter this whole cascade of things that happen in spring, with flowers budding, insects arriving, birds arriving, and so on. We've thrown that completely off track. The other thing, though, beyond climate change, is habitat loss. We've converted a huge amount of forest, meadows of grasslands and wildflowers the insects love. We've converted that to urban areas, highways, industrialized farming, so single monocultural plots of land, which insects are essentially a desert for insects. They don't have anything to eat in those environments. And the third big thing is pesticide use. We've not only kind of made these places into deserts for insects, we poison them. We've doused them in huge amounts of chemicals aimed at designed to kill off pests, but they actually kill everything else in their wake too. All the bees and butterflies and beetles that we actually value and we want around, kind of indiscriminately killed off by pesticides. So those are the three big things. They overlap with each other, they interplay with each other. And there are other things as well, like light pollution that affects fireflies and some other insects too. But those would be the three big culprits that a lot of scientists would point to.
Let's talk pesticides. You have a chapter in the book called "The Peak of the Pesticide." You're talking about rainforests in Britain, which is obviously surprising to me and to a lot of people. It will be a revelation to many. There are rainforests in Britain, not the tropical type that blankets the Amazon thick with jaguars, poisoned dart frogs, and sloths, but the temperate version found in the world's fringes: coastal Alaska, Tasmania, southern Chile. Skipping forward a little bit, these places were common to Britain following the last ice age around 10,000 years ago. They are fairy tale forests, riven by gurgling streams, gnarled ancient trees, and imposing boulders blanketed in startling blanketed in startlingly green ferns and mosses. Large leafy lichens called tree lungworts actually resemble the lungs of these forests, its lobes splayed outwards, saturated by rain and the tang of humidity. Despite being in a mild climate, these scraps of rainforest conjure a Tolkien like world where you could imagine a hobbit living within the hillsides or an elf fashioning a bow and arrow underneath the outstretched limbs of an oak. What are we doing to these places with pesticides?
Well, we're clearing them. We're chopping down the forests all over the world for farmland and to less extent urban expansion, and we are poisoning them with pesticides. That's quite clear. The land is far more toxic than it used to be. By one estimate, U.S. agricultural land is 48 times more toxic than it was 25 years ago because of this constant layering of new chemicals on top of each other, over application of them. And it's become quite a hard place for many insects and other animals to survive in. It's extremely deadly for them. I mean, if you think about the environmental movement, how it kicked off in the 1960s, in part through the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Her big focus was this chemical DDT, which was blamed for killing off birds, including the bald eagle, and what's more un-American than killing off the bald eagle. And so it led to these restrictions on DDT and the application of DDT everywhere, which was welcome, but what's replaced them is in many respects more dangerous and more toxic. I mean, by one estimate, neonicotinoids, which is this main class of pesticides that are used in agricultural land in the US, in Europe and elsewhere, is 7,000 times more toxic to bees than DDT. So we've replaced one class of chemical with another that's actually far worse for bees and butterflies. It leaches into soils because it's water soluble, so it gets into streams. It doesn't stay in the plant, which is the annoying thing for many entomologists. It doesn't stay in the crop that you've sprayed or had a seed coated with it and then grown into a plant to kill off the pests. It actually just leaches out of the plant quite quickly and into the surrounding environment. So it doesn't even really do the job in many respects that it's designed to do, which is incredibly frustrating for a lot of entomologists who look at this. So we've kind of got ourselves into a cycle and an addiction towards chemicals on agricultural land in particular, and in gardens too. In people's backyards, people use chemicals too. I mean, we're all quite hooked on the idea of getting rid of pests, using as many kind of chemical treatments as we possibly can. It's taken a toll. It's you can't just pick up one pest and just get that. You're going to spread it all around the environment. It's going to be picked up in pollen. It's going to be moved around by bees. It's going to be taken into their hives. It's going to be, it's going to coat butterfly wings. It's kind of going to get everywhere. And that's essentially what we've done. We talk about the kind of widespread effects that we've had on the world. Climate change is the biggest because it affects every inch of this planet. Pesticide use is close behind, I would say, because most places in this world have been treated in terms of agricultural land with some sort of pesticide, and yeah, it's been fairly disastrous for insects.
How helpful is it, do you think, for the ordinary person who cannot control climate change policy, cannot control energy policy, cannot control pesticide use over 2.5 million acres in the middle of the United States and farmland in southern Illinois or whatever? How important would it be for someone to say, okay, I'm going to have on my urban setting, maybe I'll put out 2 plants or something, or I'll plant a little flower bed, 2 by 3 feet or something like that, or whatever. I mean, does that have an effect? Those little tiny things. I mean, cultivating something for some insect to enjoy, to use, and to obviously to make useful.
Yeah, it does. I mean, obviously, it doesn't solve the problem, but there are good things we can do to help insects in a kind of small way. If you do have a backyard, even if you just have a small, window box of flowers, you can plant, native plants that pollinators like. You can, if you have a backyard, you can not rake the leaves as often because insects like living there. You can let the grass grow a little bit, which is horrifying to a lot of people. The idea that you have this untamed area But insects don't like uniformity of, closely cropped grass, single plants. They like a jumble of vegetation, a variety of different things. We've kind of made the land quite kind of manicured and boring in many respects to them, for their interests. So kind of bringing back a bit of wildness to our lives, to even urban areas, I think is very welcome and gives them a foothold. It gives them an oasis, a place to kind of survive. I mean, one of the ecologists I spoke to said it's a bit like insects or a log that we've on water that we're pushing down with our foot, and they're kind of submerged. We just let our foot off a bit, they can bob back up again. They are the great survivors of our world, after all. I mean, they predated the dinosaurs, they outlived the dinosaurs, they've got through a lot of bad stuff in the history of our planet. If we just give them a little chance, they can bounce back again. We just need to ease off a little bit.
Let's stick on pesticides for a moment. I'm going to read from here. This maybe won't be shocking to a lot of people. You write here, quoting, that pesticide manufacturers have funded groups that dispute research finding neonics are harmful, co-opted previously critical scientists, and backed bee health initiatives that are heavily skewed toward targeting mites rather than chemicals. Emails show that Monsanto, which is now part of Bayer, attempted to orchestrate a campaign to discredit scientists linking Roundup to cancer concerns, while Bayer has created online videos depicting people worried about pesticides as conspiracy theorists fond of talking to flowers and downplaying the harm caused by the chemicals. This is quoting a voiceover over some of the footage. The truth is, our body handles all sorts of chemicals every day, which is normal. The voiceover states over footage of a sugar cube splashing into a cup of tea and a woman applying lipstick. It's rather predictable, no, that this would be the line that the pesticide is sort of like the tobacco industry of late. What to do about that? Oliver
Yeah,
Milman,
I mean,
yeah?
it is depressingly familiar, isn't it? I mean, anyone who's followed the story of climate change will know that the fossil fuel industry sort of discredited the science, downplayed the science, and has now kind of shifted to this kind of delayism where they kind of act like fossil fuels are an integral part of life. It would cause economic and personal ruin if we phase them out in any way. You mentioned the tobacco industry, similar kind of playbook, really. I mean, this is all very familiar. Big ag, big food, which includes pesticide makers, are incredibly powerful. These are very kind of huge corporations, very wealthy. They have huge influence. Certainly in the US, in Congress, I've seen several kind of lawmakers say that their influence is beyond most industries, really. I mean, they have a huge lobbying presence there, and they've kind of not only convinced lawmakers but also farmers that the presence of pesticides is essential. Is essential for food production, to avoid food shortages, to avoid huge pest outbreaks. They've not only kind of financially and politically muscled their way into the conversation, they've kind of culturally almost taught us that we have to spray pesticides everywhere, otherwise we're in huge trouble. So from their point of view, they've been very successful in their lobbying efforts and squashing any kind of major dissent to that.
Are governments doing something or pushing back, say England or the United States? Are these governments saying, well, we have to do something different, or are they putting in sort of laws about pesticides, or is this way out in the fringe, not nearly a top level concern? Well, obviously it's not a top level concern, but are there lawmakers who are doing something?
They are. I mean, in Europe, certainly the situation is very different to here. So European Union has banned the top 3 worst neonicotinoids, these kind of bee-killing pesticides. France has gone further to ban them indoors in greenhouse use as well as outdoors. The European Union is also kind of paying farmers to kind of put these wildlife corridors through their farmlands so that there's nice kind of fringes of habitat and food for insects that lace through the agricultural land, so it's not just this kind of moonscape of nothing to eat and pesticides everywhere. So there is a kind of shift underway in Europe. The US is behind on that conversation. There are some farmers looking to do things differently, regenerative agriculture and so on. And there's certainly some shift by grassroots groups to kind of lessen people's impact upon insects. But in terms of the highest levels of office, Congress acting, I mean, it's been very hard to do. I mean, Barack Obama he tried to ban pesticide use, neonicotinoid use within national parks, U.S. national parks, but Donald Trump rolled back that ban. So the US has been quite slow, I think, to actually acting on this issue.
As you know, music always plays a part on this podcast. No matter who you are, we always talk some about music, and it's interesting to think about the music that many insects create. I was thinking, well, what are some of the sounds that we hear, if it's beetles or cicadas or crickets, and the incredible rhythm they have and the distinctive tone that a lot of these insects have. And there have been studies. I think there was a study in Germany about the quality of honey and a beekeeper who was playing Mozart for the bees versus a segment that had no music at all. And they were measuring the quality of the honey. It was much higher from the bees that were exposed daily to hours of Mozart. So there's always a parallel. What is music for you? And does music? We think about the sounds of nature, and it's music from insects in addition to birds.
Yeah, I mean, nature has its kind of own rhythms, doesn't it? And certainly you can pick out tunes, you can pick out kind of melodies in there. I've been around cicadas as they were emerging. They'd have these kind of 17-year dormancies underground and then emerge, and they emerge in their millions. And the sound is incredible. I mean, it's kind of like this, it sounds almost like electricity, like this crackle, just like, and it's this amazing kind of sound. And yeah, I mean, insects are incredibly musical. They have their own kind of rhythms. When you're in an area like a wildflower meadow that's not been cut down, it hasn't been doused in chemicals, it's what things used to be like. You can feel that and see it, but also you can hear it. There's a kind of thrumming noise, there's kind of pulsing kind of beat to it. And it feels very alive. It feels kind of, very kind of vibrant and alive, and somewhere you want to be. It's not a deadened kind of quiet kind of nature deprived zone, which is what we've made much of the world. So yeah, I mean, there is that musical element to insects. I mean, in terms of me personally, there's a lot of music that inspires me, helps me write, helps me stay grounded in these kind of tricky times.
Like what? Like what?
Like what? Well, I mean, I've been a huge fan of soul music since I was a kid. My mum used to play kind of Nina Simone and James Brown. Otis Redding is a huge artist in my life. Listening to him, Baby Huey. Some of these guys are just fantastic. Solomon Burke. So I've always enjoyed kind of soul music, the soothing nature of it, but also kind of quite stirring at the same time. It's really the best soul singers I feel managed to get both of those qualities. But through the kind of 90s, I kind of got into very much into guitar music as well. The British-based bands, Blur and Oasis, Radiohead, and so on. So those have always kind of stayed with me too. There are some newer artists now, but I probably getting to the age where I'm listening to things from the past more than the present.
I hear that a lot from people, and there's no. Sometimes people are ashamed of that, but there's no shame in that. Everybody should listen to what they like. Sometimes people say, I only like music. Listening to music that I listened to when I was 21 to 25 years old, and I'm stuck there. Now I'm 70, I'm stuck there. Fine, listen to it. It's great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I kind of think about that time span though, because when I was growing up, the Beatles, I love the Beatles, but they seem like an ancient thing. And now that time period is probably the same between what I listened to and what they listened to, 60s, to the 90s and 90s and now. But yeah, I try to stay alive to new things. Wet Leg is a good young band I like, um, uh, and Widow's Peak is another good band from Brooklyn, New York that I've listened to. Parquet Courts, another New York band I enjoy seeing. But obviously, live music hasn't really been a huge thing over the last kind of couple of years. Hopefully that can come back into my life a little bit more.
You know, returning to the non-musical world of insects, do you have a prescription for what people can do? It's not exactly an easy sell when you say, well, you know, I don't know, whatever, some beautiful animal, some kind of tiger or something is disappearing. You know, you would see pictures and it's sort of striking and beautiful. You talk about insects, it's a bit of a tougher sell, I think, um, emotionally maybe, or to get people on board. But you also talk about the risks. If insects disappeared, humans would disappear, and probably quickly. I mean, maybe millions of people would die within months, according to scientists. So yes, it's important, but what can you say about people's ability to act, or what they should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me is the most interesting part of this book is the cultural element of what we think about insects and how their importance does not match the importance we put upon them or the value we put upon them. I mean, our whole our whole kind of verbiage, the way we describe the natural world, it's not very friendly to insects, is it? I mean, we call them creepy crawlies, which is quite rude. We say that people who are irritating us are bugging us. We kind of think about, wasps as being, these things that will sting us rather than actually the things that are going to eat the pests and pollinate the plants that keep us going. Bees too. I mean, we think fondly of bees, I think, and butterflies, but that's kind of it. There's a million named species of insects, and we probably only think fondly of a couple of them. So it's this huge cultural barrier that we do need to overcome. I think people do kind of understand on the level, though, and increasingly so, that we need to keep bees around. If we want to kind of keep the world as we have around. I think the trouble is that we often don't value the things most important to us until they seem to be under threat. We don't understand all that background work being done to pollinate foods, decompose waste, cycle nutrients through soils and plants. We don't see it. It's very invisible to us, isn't it? The products are still on our shelves in the supermarket. We can still eat. I mean, if you're a big chocolate fan, you probably don't realize that a tiny midge that can get into the cacao plant and pollinate it is crucial to the entire $100 billion chocolate industry. Without that tiny midge, the industry is gone. There's no way they can replace that. But no chocolate fan would think about that. You wouldn't think about the importance of a tiny midge. You'd think, oh, if I could get rid of all midges, I probably would, because they seem to be annoying. But so we have that mismatch. We don't have that cultural appreciation of them. Certainly in the Western world. I think in other parts of the world there is, because the insects are eaten and they're kind of part of people's diets, and people understand that a bit more. In the Western world, I think we miss that, and hopefully that can change with the understanding that they're under threat. I mean, you kind of see this time again. You've seen the pandemic about people don't really think about supply chains really, because it's kind of boring and kind of invisible. But when you can't get stuff, you start to think, oh, okay, maybe this, these kind of things that happen in the background we don't think about it. It's actually very, very important. Hopefully, we won't get to the stage as we have with climate change, where we've left it so long that things are kind of breaking down badly, and we're going to suffer terrible harm, whatever happens, for us to realise that we should act on this. I'm hopeful that we can reorientate ourselves in terms of the way we think about the natural world to value insects and bring them into our lives a little bit rather than try and banish them entirely. Before we're struck with food shortages, which the UN has warned about this century, we're facing a food security issue because there's less pollination and more people. So we need to be able to grow food. We need to be able to feed the world's population. And insects are really the only ones who can do what they do.
Is all this stemming from the fact that we have too many people on the planet and the population is growing too quickly? I mean, is this the root cause of everything in a way?
I'd hesitate to say that because consumption levels are so vastly different from someone in America compared to someone in Mozambique or India or wherever. I mean, population is part of the issue because obviously you need more mouths to feed, you need to grow more food. And where does that food come from? Do you chop down forests to grow more food? Do you more intensively farm the land you have, which means more chemicals? So that's a pretty horrible choice to make. But I don't think I wouldn't say that population is the kind of primary driver of this. I mean, it's not kind of India and China and other kind of in Nigeria and countries with growing populations these that has caused this issue. Really, they're not the ones developing these huge monocultural farming practices, new chemicals. They're not the ones historically they've driven climate change. They're not the ones who've historically driven the loss of rainforests. I mean, there was one scientist I spoke to who works in the Amazon, he's British, and he says people in the Amazon go, well, why are you lecturing us about chopping down trees? Because you got rid of all your trees 1,000 years ago. So, I think us in the West can be kind of hypocrites on this sometimes. Yeah, I think it's an important aspect of this population, but it's not the panacea. We need to kind of fundamentally change the way we do things rather than simply have fewer people.
But short of joining an anti-pesticide lobby or something, or running for office, what do you suggest that the ordinary person does? I mean, as you mentioned before, you're not going to not swat a mosquito when it starts to bite you on the forearm or something. So, yeah, what should people be doing if we have, I don't know, 10 extra minutes a day? Should we do a little reading, educate ourselves? Are there any actions we can take that could be helpful, or just genuinely try to have a more appreciative view?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things. I mean, you've got to vote for the right people. You've got to, cut down on the chemicals you use in your everyday life. Eat organic. Organic food's a good way of going to. I mean, I wouldn't say, you don't have to swat a mosquito, and all insects are hugely as valuable as each other. I mean, what's happening is a reordering of the insect world. So we're getting rid of the things we value and like, bees and butterflies and beetles and things like that. And we're creating conditions that are actually quite valuable for a lot of the things we don't like, the mosquitoes and bed bugs and cockroaches. I mean, a world that's hotter with more people on it, with more waste around, is perfect for cockroaches. They love that. They're going to thrive in that world. We don't want them around. That's not the world that we want. But the natural world doesn't really care if the world is full of lions and rhinos, or rather than raccoons and rats and mosquitoes. I mean, it just responds to the conditions that we are creating. We're creating a world that's kind of ideal for cockroaches and mosquitoes and rats and raccoons. We can change that.
You've spent a career as a science reporter. You wrote this book. What's coming next for you? What are you very concerned about right now? Maybe that we may not be thinking about in the general public.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think obviously climate change is the kind of the dominant theme when you think about environmental issues, and it had just so many issues, so many different impacts and consequences that we're only really beginning to kind of grasp. Certainly as we kind of continue to delay and dawdle over doing something about it. I mean, I think the shift of people and its role in conflicts, like you're seeing in Ukraine at the moment, you see fossil fuels as a kind of part of that. It kind of funds Russia. Europe is dependent upon Russia for fossil fuels. Imagine if that wasn't in the equation. Imagine if gasoline prices in the US weren't a huge political calculation for presidents to make other decisions on. Imagine if all cars ran on electricity, and it was cheaper and it wasn't dependent on foreign wars. I mean, this whole big geopolitical questions I feel that have been thrown up recently through that, and back previously through other kind of conflicts and things like that. If you think about migration, the movement of people, you're seeing people move from Central America now to US because of droughts and other kind of climate big climate impacts, and you're seeing that kind of start to spin around the world in terms of what's happening in Syria, for example, was kind of partially due to the drought they had there. So yeah, I feel the world in many respects is in a state of flux at the moment, and climate change is pushing us beyond our kind of sense of normalcy. And I think, yeah, I hope to kind of explore that further, because there's certainly a rich territory. There's certainly lots happening when it comes to the impacts of climate change.
Well, we'll look forward to that. We'll look forward to another conversation. In the meantime, a very, very most interesting book, The Insect Crisis, The Fall of the Tiny Empires That Run the World. And you really mean that, as we learn in this book. Oliver Milman, fascinating stuff indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Good to be with you.